Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode. The title of tonight's episode is a important one. It is one where I was actually thinking even of making a separate YouTube channel by this name. And so I would like to speak about a concept I call the winds of evolution. Imagine the surface of this world, of this rock. There are winds moving, and not just winds that we feel there's a subtle pressure on our backs, but there are winds and rhythms moving, kind of a sort of movement of waves on the ground, as if how we see the sands at the shore as the various waves hit it and reshape it, and whatever you write in the sand will get washed back into the ebbs and flows of how life is moving. I find that there are certain rhythms that the human being can access. I remember being young and being introduced to this concept. I think I was around 11, 10, 11, where I suddenly I came across this kind of bit of information that said human beings are using like 10 to 12% of their brains. And so it was like a question mark for me how the rest of the brain could be used. It was one of those questions that lingered in my subconscious. And eventually I discovered the rest of it is not used by an individual intelligence. So in some sense, either the right moment has to arise for the right ability to emerge, or in some sense it is unlocked by a different will, as if you need a key for that part of your brain. You need an engine. You need something to start the engine. It always fascinates me, and at the same time, it shocks me that we are temporary beings. It shocks me because we can do nothing on some level. Our influence is very small macrocosmically. But in a micro way, in the worlds that we acknowledge, we can bring change. The winds of evolution are a suggestion of the rhythmic site of our species, that it moves in rhythms, that in some sense, imagine just like radio waves, in some sense, there are vast waves, waves that the planet like a radio is receiving. I find that when the human being trusts the moment has an allowance to occur. The subjective realm, it's like a lot of ritual practice, a lot of things that people do. Certain actions, you can say, they steer your attention through thought, and certain actions steer your intelligence through emotion. I find emotion is this result of oscillating between a viewpoint of everything and nothing. In the sense that there is something, there is not going to be something. There is something now, that thing is not going to be here later. This constant light turning on and off is causing the creature to have various emotions and various senses of self to itself. I say that, when the person blinks, when the person sleeps, it's like the world is blinking. The whole projection of an existence shuts down for a moment. I'd say for a moment, even though it's a bunch of hours, but for a moment, because time is not present in deep sleep. So that gives us a sense of what kind of creatures we are. You know, in deep sleep, we're not worried about time. The mind is alive even when the body is asleep, hence our dream states. That livelihood of mind is very profound because it can conceive a realm. So, in some sense, the human being is bestowed with an intelligence that, even if its body doesn't move, can project a body in a world. You know, so it's kind of like waking up from a dream and being like, wait a minute, could this be another dream? And the yogis thought life was a dream. That's why they were trying to renounce it. They thought there was something impure about their sight, so they were pushed into a certain cave of conception. The story of life is one where what thought approaches what person at what time. And is it the necessary thought or is it not necessary? And the necessity of something is based on the intention of use. That means just look at how many things in this life that you care about and how many things you don't even have a second thought on. Like the color of the bottom of the fridge. Like no person has a second sight. You know, there's like it's too dark, you know. It's the fascinating thing is the moment holds reality and value. Reality is found as a phenomena in the moment. So once the person is comfortable with the objective realm, and once they are comfortable with the subjective realm, and once they can be the witness as the moment, the whole moment, then the change of the content of the whole content of the moment is witnessed. That means I realized how powerful the subconscious was. Do you know? I'm walking by like, my kitchen and suddenly I get this thought of like extraterrestrials from like a star system. Then I look around and I'm like, this was a random thought that appeared. And I looked around and I noticed I had, for example, Vega protein. I forgot that I'd kind of bought this protein and the word Vega was being acknowledged by my awareness and somehow the thought had come. You know, that's the thing. Thoughts are like when you pinpoint them down, it's like kind of like it tells you the truth, strangely. This is a crazy concept that the thoughts of man can be scared of him. What is freedom for a world that dies? If it takes our whole life to kind of find our place in the system, when will in during the lifetime, when will there be questions about the system? I feel life is a game of service and joy. That means there are moments where life is serving you, you feel joyous. And there are moments where you are serving life and you're creating joy. To be honest, it's pretty much what role you have as a human being in the background of people's worlds. in 2014 to 15. This is something I haven't typically shared in these talks, but the mind of the unknown was proven to me. And what I mean by that was that there was a moment where the inner reality's significance and the outer reality's significance seemed to be moving in accordance to the significance of the unknown other. Now, when it comes to consciousness, I find it becomes a very interesting situation. And there's a kind of dilemma there, because as you reverse engineer back into how your memories create you, you automatically are introduced to various environments. Sometimes you're remembering environments, sometimes it's a bunch of memories coagulated together. So the memory is close to a visualization, you know. The nature, to be honest, it has to do with how you enter the room, and where, in some sense, kind of, I remember in one talk I explained it like, imagine a cup filled with water and the person is spinning their hand as they're throwing the water, and they're seeing this water, let's say, being thrown into a swimming pool. It's as if the unique angle that it is thrown influences the impact, right? So how certain things are caused will influence the effect. Now, behind our eyes, this is the approach people don't normally have. They just run into it, or they get shocked or fascinated, and it's as if they still have a solo approach. I had noticed a sort of moment where, how can I tell you, in 2014 I noticed my own ego was being held by the unknown. I noticed that the thought of self is so dependent on energetic expression that on some level it's like based on where the attention goes and stands, that's where the reality comes into meaning. So it's another sense of acknowledging the attention of the being in a simulation of a subjective creation, you know. And so what that means is that you are not just you're not just embodied objectively, you're also embodied subjectively, and the subjective bodies can change in an instant. They can translate to a sort of geometrical dimension of existence. They can translate into a totally fluid, dynamic intelligence, where it's like, because the phenomena is alive, in some sense it has a randomity factor that you won't see, you wouldn't normally expect. You see, it's as if like there, in ancient times, the master only chose the student only when the master had something to give, and only when the student could take it. Do you see? It's as if like there was this there was this person, this kid that goes to the Sufi. This, and back in the day in the Sufi tradition, they said those who were enlightened, they had the pearl. Pretty much like, imagine in the streets people discussing, they're like, yo, this guy has the pearl, you know, that guy has the pearl. It's like that guy's seen the truth. It's like that kind of cultural in the streets buzz. This kid hears this, he eventually finds someone, the Sufi dervish who is at the market buying vegetables. He notices this guy and he's like, okay, now's the time, now's the moment, I'm gonna go ask him. And the kid has a kind of relatively kind of intelligent problem. And so what I mean by that is the kid comes to the Sufi who's in this, like, buying vegetables in his kind of like basket or something. And he tells the Sufi, how do I, just instantly, as if he already knows he has the pearl, the kid says, how do I get rid of my chain of attachments? Pretty much he's looking at this guy and saying, how do I get rid of my attachment to my problems, or how do I get rid of the way my eyes are open inefficiently? The Sufi dervish sees the subtle pride that this kid has. The kid is assuming he can see the truth, you know. So he sees that intellectually this kid is too shaped to seek a shape. You know, that's the issue with pride. Sometimes it closes your eyes from what else there is. But so what happens is the Sufi dervish, instead of like having a conversation with the kid, he just suddenly is like, there's this moment of silence. The kid's asked this question, waiting for the Sufi dervish, enlightened guy to give an answer. And the guy goes to a pillar, like a stone column, and like by the market, and he puts his basket beside it, and he starts hugging, like insanely, intensely hugging the stone pillar, and shouting like a madman in the market, "Save me from this column! Save me from this stone pillar that I'm hugging! Save me!" Like he's shouting like crazy, you know. Suddenly, in that moment, this kid feels embarrassed. He's like, what is this guy doing? You know, and he runs to this guy and he's like, hey man, you want to save yourself from like this stone pillar, just let it go, all right? What is this? Just let go, you're supposed to be enlightened. And then, right when the kid says, let it go, then this Sufi dervish drops the act and looks at this kid and says, if it is that easy for me to let go of this pillar that is the cause of my problem, why is it not that easy for you to let go of your worldly attachments? What the moral of that story was that it takes an instant to be free. And honestly, the actions of a person reflect the type of world they see. If they see the world is burning, they will burn inside. If they see the world is sinking, they will sink inside. If they see that the world is fighting for its last breath, they will fight for their last breath. We are such creatures of replication, of just copy pasting phenomenology. It's ridiculous. You know, kind of like the search for our own eyes is trying to wonder what's beyond space. Like not outer space, what's beyond space, you know? Doesn't matter if it's inner or outer. It's just what is the texture of intelligence upon space. And so it's one, for me at least, one that it awakens into manifest geometric design, and in some sense goes back to sleep in the attributeless. So it's kind of like you got to be willing to let go of who you have been for the day. You don't know, it's many nights I just come and collapse on my bed tired. And as I'm on my bed before I fall asleep, I kind of like this is kind of strange, but I like pat my own back and then I fall asleep. And the reason is because I contemplate, all right, another moment, another day was lived, another series of actions were animated. Sometimes the eagle doesn't need to be on the ground when there's a herd of buffaloes coming, you know. It can look from the sky at the herd. They can experience space differently. So you see, it's like some people were considering the factors. I mean, this is a good thing for every person in the world to think about at least once. The evolution of human design, of the Homo sapien. You know, I wondered about it so far. It's like, I've heard arguments where some people were like, when Darwin came and spoke about evolution, and how there was a sort of evolution, a kind of transformation of a chimpanzee. People were like, Darwin, are you calling your mother an ape? You know, they were. There are challenge. There was a cultural resistance like that. But any person can put the palms of their feet on the ground and totally see how we were designed to be on four limbs. What made us stand on two legs was unnatural. I feel you call it extraterrestrial, extra dimensional, whatever, you know? Something caused us to move faster. It's kind of like the nudge of a god uh, um, on like the forehead of a species, you know? It's like how can many people are seeking to, how can I say it, like in many religious countries people are it's as if imagination is denied but divinity is allowed. How crazy is that? That it's as if the unknown is filtered, is permitted only through certain viewpoints. You know, when I was younger, I could say this was 7 years ago, I had this impression that I had to get a step out of my conditioning. And the thing was, I managed to not only step out of it, not only to discover the language threshold, but I came to a realization of the value of the first waves of data given. You see, everything the mind has seen, it's like putting a bunch of different coins from different countries in one jar and shaking them. Do you see? And the coins fall down and are placed upon the conscious moment differently. That means when man closes his eyes, he is the ever-present kind of change of the subjective universe. But when he opens his eyes, he's just, some kid in Toronto. There are many fascinating stories with transcendental conclusions in history. I find at some point one has to maintain a certain distance from language. As they observe language, they observe it as a technology. Now, here's the cool thing. You can either keep engaging it and build the momentum of your intellect. That means keep updating the tool. Or in some sense, you can put the tool down and go discover different rhythms of how intelligence becomes present. Because I am telling you, I am aware of the ivory tower that my environment is upon my thinking. I know that the inner reality, like that was the whole point. The yogi sat down, it didn't matter if it was moving or not, the mind was. The movement of the mind is, it doesn't get more divine than that, guys. There's the story of these three friends. These three friends are running in the forest, and suddenly, one of them sees in the distance there's this long flagpole, and there's like this kind of unique, imagine like flag, on it. Just like this white flag, imagine, purely kind of like, what are the colors of Earth? Let's say blue. Let's say black, blue, white, green, brown, red. Imagine they see a flag with those colors, representing the center of the earth to the edge of the sky. One of the friends that notices the flag, he's like, guys, look at that flag. Everybody looks at the flag. And that kid looks at one of the other friends and says, hey, guys, it's the flag that's moving. It's not the wind that's moving it. I'm convinced that flag is moving right now. And then his friend's like, a flag can't move. It has to be the wind. And so they suddenly, there's this philosophical kind of playful gladiator arena is approached. Subjective gladiator arena. We need those in civilization to have the minds of people step out of the shells of their conditioning. So what happens is, as the first one says, is convinced the flag is moving. The second one is convinced the wind is moving, and the third one's just watching the flag, and then he suddenly notices he's blinking, you know, as he's watching the flag, and suddenly notices, wait a minute, without the mind, how could movement be seen? And he looks at his friends and he's like, yo guys, it's the mind that's moving. And that becomes kind of like what is claiming, what is holding attention as its source, or what is attention holding as its source. It was a surprise for me when I realized kind of like the reason I cannot entertain too much imagery of myself in regards to a future self and a past self, like the way I'm kind of treating this life is like, all right, the eyes are open and they will close, and then they may open and then they will close, you know, and eventually it becomes one where you become content. You're like, it's like disrespectful to the cells of your body, the journey of your cells to be immortal. Nature serves you, and you know, as one climbs down the mountain of life, in some sense you serve nature. It's not just what we leave behind that matters. It is the journey of the travelers during, like the travelers during the journey, their experience matters as well. This is the only reason why I feel resources should be shared, because it's literally, religions are attempting to be, just ideologies are attempting to be tour guides of consciousness traveling through manifestation periodically. You see, it really matters what story we tell. It defines our exploration. There's a talk I've recorded, but I haven't uploaded yet. It's called "The Eyes After Death," and the universal failure. And the universal failure is the subtitle of it. And so, just to share a thought from that lecture, was that I brought forth this idea that what that moment of change would be for the eyes that are transitioning from a state of being alive to death is a kind of dissolution, and sometimes he doesn't want to go down alone. It's like once the self dies, the world is going down with it. Do you see what I mean? So the universal failure is a suggestion that, believe it or not, there will come a moment where the world will let go of you and you will let go of the world. The moment you let go of the world, that literally means your objective lifetimes becomes a memory for a field. So what I mean by that is like, we are starting off from being individual drops. These individual drops merge eventually into streams. Streams become rivers. Rivers go through a multidimensional shift through the waterfall. Eventually, the momentum and the experience of the river takes it towards an ocean. And so it's this process of world building self, self building world building self, self building world, right? And so at the beginning of your life, the child is building self first. And then it's like after you have built self, then you go trying to do things that bring the world of that self into reality. The story of thought is honestly an interesting one. It has been evoked in so many ways. At some point, the story is just a blindfold. It's just literally, you can say, our senses of subjective being is literally like a Venetian mask party, a Venetian masquerade, where it's like literally language is painted in the through the essence of the person. If we realize we're communicators, this is what I call how one's concentration on what communication is eventually reaches such an advanced point that it's like the conscious self is able, the subconscious self is able, then the only way for the unconscious self to be truly able is for the subconscious self and the conscious self to realize they were unconscious from the beginning. So what it is really you can't go explore without having a change in reality. And so I'm saying we are creatures that are alive now in an atmosphere of definition, in a sort of world that has brought forth language. You see, the winds of evolution did not just want creatures that did labor. They wanted also minds. It's like this whole next level philosophical argument, kind of up for discussion. Like, have this argument with as many people as you'd like, but it's one of those things where we're thinking, okay, so something objective, cells kind of evolved, like on a cellular level there was survival of intelligence, even though there was an apocalyptic situation happening on the surface of the planet. So we see it's like from tiny cells, after 4 billion years, this is what has arose. That's a very beautiful story. But the thing is, what is left here now has gone from being, it's like matter evolved into thought. Now thought is acknowledging itself in the linguistic realm through language, so we're becoming creatures of thought and language more than we're actually living as objective beings. And I don't know if people are noticing this, but it's about literally how much subjective phenomena occurs and how much objective phenomena. And for the first time in history, I find with the incredible bombarding of, it's kind of like the creature has an urge to know, at the same time its urge to know is taking it to an incredibly large database of various pictures. So I can tell you how it's as if like the creation of the internet was fascinating, was incredible, was a treasure, but at the same time it was a treasure that came with a weight, and that weight was the sacrifice of the opportunity, pretty much the opportunity cost of attention living naturally to attention living in the amazement of the subjective realm. Because something about the mind, as long as you're alive, it can create as many complexities as you want. And complexity arises simply from a sort of copy paste of the simple. And what that means is it's like the cells evolved into a collective phenomena. But that collective phenomena was still an individual in a greater perception. So what that means is the evolution of the collective is back into a higher individual. The evolution of the individual is back into a higher collective. This will endlessly occur as long as we're individual creatures. You cannot ignore this. You cannot ignore being an individual in this world. if you are choosing to have a mind. But I will tell you, there legend has it there have been people who have managed to put down their mind while they're still alive. And when I say to put down their mind, not to forget it, not to destroy it, not to resist it, not to hate it, not to regret it, not to feel guilty about it, but to discover that energy happens once in a certain design. So just like, imagine the old school kind of radios that showed the volume bars kind of going up and down. Imagine that volume bar constantly shifting. You know, it is like, I'm sure Beethoven understood this. Even though he was obsessed with music, he understood that there was some point where the process of creating music was indistinguishable from unknown intelligence. It's as if, like, from the movement, it's as if the symphony, the higher symphony of the higher dimensions, was not on piano keys, but it was how nature appeared to itself. I believe Ludwig von Beethoven says, dive into your art, force your way into its secrets, for it and knowledge can raise man to the divine. Something like that. He's saying, if you see in your moment something that is new, regardless of how the past is shouting at you and regardless of what the future expects of you, regardless of how the mind has appeared, to see life alive in a moment is the purpose of life. To expect life to be alive in the future is literally, I am telling you, the voice of the environment shouldn't be louder than the citizen, because if it is, the environment can be blind to the person. Do you see? It's as if like a kid asking a volcano that's about to erupt not to erupt. You know, it's like somebody get that kid out of there. It's no longer what do we want, what kind of objects we want, but it's becoming now more like the higher luxury. I call these the luxuries of the mind. You know, it's kind of, these luxuries of the mind are the witnessing of ways that nature moves and the way that nature appears to you. And what the moment you are comfortable with something, that means the attention is free from it. The moment you're uncomfortable with something, guess what? It's like your attention is still poking somewhere. That means to have your moment truly be somewhere, that's only when beauty can arise. You know, there is a sort of strange beauty to a sunset, that it doesn't remind just of past memories, or like, you know, it's like after a war, people would see a sunset and they're like, that's the blood of our fallen comrades in the sky, you know. Like, so it's like the mind doesn't bring a story to nature. That is the ultimate freedom. It's the freedom of mind to mind, you know. I need a quick intermission, guys. I'll be back. Okay. Thanks for waiting, guys. All right, let's get into it. The winds of evolution is nature's momentum. It's kind of like the certainty outside of time, a sense of certainty outside of time. This sense of certainty outside of time is not just hovering as some sort of emotional sphere. You have to reclaim the unknown presence of your mind. You have to see it for yourself. If we consider that the world has led to the development of an individual being, of a shaped individual being, then there is a potential for a non-shaped collective being. We see that the yin-yang symbol is everywhere. We see the laws of duality painted by every beam of light that penetrates a dark room. It's honestly what we paid attention to during our lifetime. If we have this conclusion that there is collective beings, if we have this conclusion that the world evolution is a process of matter becoming into not just your mind controlling matter, but in some sense matter becoming mind, and mind appearing as a field of intelligence. So in some sense, it's like an evolution of an individual shaped being into a future unshaped collective being. So I have had this thought often where I'm like, okay, there was this, religious Abrahamic, and through an Abrahamic context, it's like the person has an angel with them. And so, believe it or not, a lot of religious people, as they entertain divinity, they do give kind of. You can say religion has one unique thing, that whatever, it's like the person has to disagree with everything, so that this one thing they agree with can be real to them. Do you know that it's like that's why faith was crucial. The attention can't be fragmented too much, or it's on neither reality at once. It's like an agnostic is just doesn't know where to look at. It's a strange fear I find. It's a fear of the future when one sees the unknown. when you see that the edge of thought is inconceivable, that reality was boxed up to a certain degree, but there are more degrees to see. Where is man led? Must he search the external for the secrets of the inner? Must he search the internal for the secrets of the external? Must he just dwell as an observer? Where does the conclusion come? And the strange thing is, if the chess pieces are not moved, the game of life doesn't continue. And what that means is every human being, every creature on this planet is a sort of chess piece, but we are a chess piece for a strategy that is not revealed yet. This is why ideology doesn't have the answer. Ideology is a tool to attain the answer, perhaps, but it is not, language has its limits. The Iron Man suit can't, like, you know, travel to Mars, you know. Meister Eckhart, this Christian, I guess, Gnostic mystic, you know, he was one of those old school, like, priests who, in some sense, would put a skull on their table to contemplate life and death. And so he has this unique quote where he says, "The same eyes I see God, or the same eyes God sees me." That's another way of saying, just like how in the Sistine Chapel there's a tiny space between the finger of man and the finger of God, it's like he is saying that tiny space, once it's connected, it's neither man nor God. It's a moment of vision that surpasses any archetype even given to the unknown. That means the person cannot, even if they wanted to, ascribe a divine agency to the unknown. I find it will get to that point, but it's kind of like, if the future is collective, then any sort of subconsciously alive archetype of any, again, a sort of divine personality, some sort of divine agency or whatever, like how would I say? You have bought something that the temporary world was selling. It's like, what can you say? You're holding vision in your hands as if it doesn't change. That's the issue with the belief. It's like, in one view, there requires to be freeing the world from yourself, and from another view, freeing yourself from the world. And therefore, liberation of both is an instant, because we are to some degree multidimensional. This was a recent finding. I had this kind of view that I was wondering about, at least from the Islamic viewpoint, the creator of the universe made man from clay, then imbued life to it with its breath, and then brought this man in front of all the angels as if the heaven angels, and in some sense he tells man to repeat the names, the holy names. So think of like creating something, and then God programmed it. It gave man a command, and man started repeating and saying all the celestial names, all the divine names, you know. And so here's the unique thing. I always wondered what was that, and I realized it was as if man made. It's as if the Abrahamic viewpoint is like I can say at least the Islamic viewpoint is kind of like God made man from clay, gave it life. So God made a shape and then gave it energy. And then, in some sense, told this energy to, and made this energy by acknowledging different names have personalities. So it's kind of like first there came the design of the world, then there came the energy for that design to be something, and then there came the multidimensionality, the personality of the cosmos, which is the story we put on it as a mask. It becomes very hard to abide by an image, I find. It's kind of like wanting something from a changing world is wanting something that if you get it will also change. So it's a more articulated response to change. That's what evolution is kind of being for the mind. A crystallization of concepts representing reality, the marriage of subjectivity and objectivity. It's kind of like Friedrich Nietzsche said, God is dead and man killed him. And in some sense, I feel that's another way of saying the personality of the unknown died to the objective. So it's as if after the personality of the unknown died, soon the unknown would be confronted. And the only way to kill the unknown is you can't really do anything, so you hide into a known simulation. That's one fear I have for the world, that technology is going to eventually have more and more of an intimate relationship with the mind of the person, that the person is going to eventually noticing how attention moves throughout the day, sacrifice emotional gratification for actual objective external evolution. Right? So what that means is our emotions are going to lead us astray if reality can be an easier simulation. I feel this is something that may happen in the future, you know. It's like the same thing I'm saying, the evolution of matter into thought, the evolution of an individual shaped being to an unshaped collective being. Well, an external way this can happen is pretty much all our brains plugged into the same machine, you know, into the same cloud. Or another way it can happen is like the total remembrance, the evolutionary return to nature. And what that means, you kind of remember nature as a collective field of intelligence. So it's as if you, instead of you searching for the nature, is another way of, instead of you searching to become a collective being, you already are one, right? And the mystical practice was close to nature, so its divinity was integrative with the, it's like the archetypes of what the unknown, it's like a man who's lived in nature knows that speed is not the justifier of of any sort of success. It is just attention and the efficiency of the vision in regards to how it expresses. In every generation, they see the worlds that are being forgotten and the worlds that are not. Survival in modern society is no longer about just an attention to objective strength. It has to do with, it's no longer survival of the fittest, it's survival of whoever's the most aware of what's going on. Do you know? Many systems, many programs at work and alive. It honestly feels for me like in this book I'm going to publish soon called Godlike Spheres. It became very ridiculous for me to kind of suddenly be like, okay, the earth is so big, but only the surface of the earth is accessible. So you see kind of us kind of thinking about, okay, let's say we thought overpopulation was a big deal because we were only materialistically looking at things. Okay? We weren't acknowledging people have minds, we just thought they're objects. Okay? So we would see, okay, so what that means is too many people, too many influences. That means it's pretty much man, as much as he thinks he's ordered, if you were to kind of look at his globe from an aerial view, it would geometrically be different. What that means is no one is ever who they are, who they think they are in one moment. The moment goes forth. That's the promising part of life. It's kind of like the decision is you either want to see what happens or you don't. But eventually you'll realize the opportunity to see what happens, it took 4 billion years. And so we have to respect the rooms we're in. I find 2019 is a moment where there is coming that full transition. Literally, people are getting glimpses of not just being a particle that's intelligence on its own, but a particle in which it's part of a field of intelligence. What does that mean? That means there are cultures for the mind developing in the subconscious of people who don't even acknowledge the mind. That means we are always seeing the dance of the mind, but we don't know how to acknowledge it, or we haven't acknowledged it. I will tell you myself, until 2011, I didn't acknowledge my mind. I didn't even care about my thoughts. I was just chasing the games that I could play outside. And those games were ones where if they were too much of the future, I had to just be more intense. If they were, it's like kind of like when you really want something, it's an instantaneous intention. So imagine there's like tissue box with the last tissue and everybody has a runny nose. So at that point you got at that point you have to just like you gotta it's about speed, the result. And this is the beautiful thing, that in life problems don't come all looking alike. That's the cool thing. That means it's like on a design level a problem is just how something is happening, is it not? And the states of mind sometimes find themselves in environments and ecosystems where the environment allows their natural being. That means I'll tell you the truth. I have tried this many times. Authenticity doesn't last long in societies that are experiencing high levels of hardship. It's as if people don't care, for a better way. They're like, okay, let me just get by to tomorrow. There is no, the ethos is not calling to them, kind of like how we say the voice of the logos, the whispers of the logos. how the ancient Greeks, how Socrates had this concept of the inner oracle, and the inner oracle told him to go stand in court and say what he said and do what he did. So in some sense, he had understood, he had, believe it or not, he had realized that the mind of nature is not here to all look alike. And any effort to contain something that is meant to change will be destructive. Do you know? It's honestly the cosmos kind of oscillating from a dimension, imagine numerically, going from 0, 1, 2, 3, and then let's say for now from 3 going to 1, 0. You know? So imagine the number 0, 3, 0, 1, 2, 3, 2, 1, 0, okay? So it's kind of like starting from the void, entering a singular dimension of access of intelligence, then becoming eventually dualistic, and then eventually from that dualism, in some sense, going to an endless infinitude, the third dimension with a different brush. But the way I'm kind of explaining these is that it's going from, let's say, manifest value. So if we were thinking about furniture, if we looked at an empty room, we're like, there's low kind of manifest value of furniture. It's kind of being aware of non-existence underneath the feet of existence. That strangely becomes a source of strength. People fear it, but it becomes a source of strength because it shows you the inevitable, and once you see the inevitable, you're like, okay, so that chess piece can only move that far, that viewpoint can only go this far. I remember having this viewpoint of kind of life being the snowballing moment thing, like billiard ball kind of style, like thrown as if it's something with momentum. You know, it has a sort of speed, but it has a direction, and it's like its velocity is its conscious existence, right? Direction of the energetic being, you know? I look at my body, I'm like, all right, atoms are here. I look at my mind, I'm like, okay, language is here. And then I watch what else is in the moment, and then there is that moment of the kind of nothing happening, you know. And that nothingness is where silence and stillness are the edge of language. So once you remain, once you're beyond the language threshold, you have piloted properly beyond it. Then, in some sense, the unknown and the known are not at war. You literally have got a 3 and 0 have you have somehow realized that infinity, if 0 was the main kind of onion style multidimensionality, 0 was holding it all. It's like this, it's like infinity bows to the dualistic bows to the singular bows to the absent, to the non-existent, to the non-value. And then from the non-value again emerges the singular, and then the arrival of the dual, and then the arrival of, in some sense, the infinite projection. The replication of dimensions. It was mathematics is a language. You know, I'm definitely convinced they don't introduce it properly to in schools. You know. I feel nothing will be properly understood by a person if their mind doesn't attempt the question on their own. And I guess I'll end off the talk here by saying, at some point, let's say tomorrow or whenever, at some point, just wonder what is here. And that's it. I feel just with an honest, authentic moment of just wondering, okay, what is intelligent here? it would, as your experience reestablishes this any sort of subjective projection of whatever reference you have. Let your direct experience be in the driver's seat. Let direct experience be in the driver's seat, and subjectivity and language and any sort of phenomena that comes and goes as in the passenger seat, you know. So pretty much it's another way of saying like live eternally as a temporary being. So thanks for tuning in, guys. I hope these ideas were helpful. Much blessings and namaste.